the safest communities in America, they all have one thing in common. They invest in people.
Yeah.
When a child is hungry, you don't say, hey, look, would you like to meet the commander of the 15th Police District?
One of the top taglines that at least the Republican Party has used for justifying the deployment of troops here, for justifying the ICE raids, is a crime spike, crime rates. We went actually pretty viral on this podcast for diving into some of the numbers that they had cited and explaining how they were kind of taking things out of proportion, misrepresenting things. And either way, a response that makes sense wouldn't include something like the National Guard. If I'm reading stats from your administration, we have overall violent crime being down by 23%, homicides down 46.7, shootings down 42, robberies down 33, and vehicular hijackings down 45. What is your approach? Why is your approach to driving down these crime numbers and caring for the areas that are impacted by these better than the approach that a lot of people, even in community here, will say? They'll say that they've lived through a traumatic thing or they've seen a violent crime happen. So the initial reaction is, okay, we got to get somebody with a tank come in here and just make it go away.
Bro.
Yeah.
Can you speak to the problem with that approach, and what have you and your administration done better?
It's, first of all, when I think about community safety, it's my top priority. It's what I think about every day, all day, honestly. So, my first call in the morning is usually around 8 a.m. My chief of staff and a few other people in my executive team. And that's when I find out what happened the night before once I went to bed.
Okay.
It's an anxious time for me, around 7:45, I'm thinking like, okay, what are the numbers? Who are the lives that have been impacted? And, if you don't have that as a part of your daily routine, it's, you don't have the same level of responsibility. Now,
You wake up and see a number on a screen.
Exactly, right? Where I get the full readout of what happened, who it happened to, how old they were, what neighborhood.
Wow.
And, living in Austin, I love the West Side, and I'm the first mayor, in the history of Chicago to wake up in one of the most disinvested communities, right? So I know what it's like, prior to me becoming mayor. My oldest, he's 18 now. He'll be 18 in a couple of weeks. When he's on his bike, I'm like, yo, not that street.
Yeah.
Where you going? How far? Call, text soon as you get there, right? And when you've had shootings in Austin and literally bullets coming through our home, our window, and people getting shot out right outside our home, right? And we go right to bed, like this is just normal, and we don't want to normalize it. And so I think just having a lived experience and an understanding of like what families go through when you live in communities that have been disinvested in, right? And so when we talk about investing in young people, Austin, for instance, we hired about 1,800 young people from the Austin neighborhood.
Wow.
Austin, the police district there, the 15th police district, we've seen some of the greatest declines in homicides, shooting victims, right? So we've taken this approach that, look, the safest communities in America, they all have one thing in common. They invest in people.
Yeah.
When a child is hungry, you don't say, hey, look, would you like to meet the commander of the 15th Police District?
You got to fix the material conditions.
You know what I'm saying? And so that's been our approach. But we've also worked with CVI, our community violence intervention workers. These are men and women who have been in the spiral of our penal system, and they are transforming their lives, and they're on the blocks where these feuds exist, and they work to de-escalate. But we're also reopening mental health clinics, right, so that our people can access mental health. We've expanded the CARE program, crisis assistance response engagement. 40% of the 911 calls were mental health crises. So you had police officers showing up to be a counselor.
With a gun in hand, no experience in that at all.
Nothing for those.
Exactly, right? And so when we shifted to expand the CARE program, it freed up our law enforcement to do the things that we need them to do. And then I think finally, man, you have to have real affordability in this city. Right? Because like, what good does it do to have a safe community, but can't nobody afford to live there?
Exactly.
Like, I'm grateful, Mom Donnie, did his thing. And the average price of a home in New York is $1.1 million. I was just in LA with Mayor Baz. The average price of a home in Los Angeles is $900,000. So, safer communities, but no one can afford to live there. But what does it do if we can afford to live there, but we don't feel safe? And so we've been really attacking the problem where it's policing and youth employment, policing and investing in education, policing and mental health services, right? And so it's policing and affordability, right? So it's taking that full force of government approach to be able to solve decades-old problems. Context, 1974, 970 homicides. 1995, there were, I believe, 828 homicides. In 2016, I believe there were 778 homicides. 2020, there were roughly, I believe, 805, 2022, 805 homicides. Right now, we had, we're on pace to have one of the safest years that we've seen in over 60 years. And the approach is, again, having the full force of government to address those societal issues while making sure that policing plays its part, but it's not the only thing that drives violence down in Chicago.
You had talked about policing. I don't know if you're familiar with, there was a thing called the Chicago takeovers. It was around April. It was like basically just cars in the middle of the street, just at night, just kind of rolling around. Everyone's just kind of like, acting wild. And I saw people's response to it was like, oh, we just need to, add curfews. We need to do double the police. And when in actuality, it's like, that won't actually help the problem. We have to actually look at the nuance of it. I wanted to ask you, how important is it for like young kids to have basically outlets and places to go? Because like when you look at a takeover like that and you look at an event like that, a lot of kids go there because they have nothing else to do. I was to ask, how important is it for kids to have, things to do or outlets?
School programs and stuff
absolutely.
like that.
No, look, you have to have opportunity and accountability. Like, don't misunderstand me. Like as a teacher, as a father, my father, a lot more stringent than I think than dads today. Like the new black dad, we have nothing on James Evans. My children, we can have a back and forth. My father is almost 84 years old and is suffering from Alzheimer's, and I still flinch when he walk in the room. Like, he's so honoring, man. He remembers that he forgot. There ain't no wrong with me. Okay. Good to see you, nephew. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be real. I'm just saying, that generation was built different.
Different.
So, for me, it's about, opportunity and accountability, right? And so, if people don't have safe outlets, don't act like we didn't go into the Taco Bell parking lot or White Castle. It's just certain things didn't break out because we didn't have social media the way we have today. And so, of course, we have to hold people accountable when they get out of pocket. But if you don't create opportunities for people, you're going to be chasing down bad behavior versus creating opportunities to create better behaviors.
We were talking about a little bit about when it comes to like younger kids. I remember one of the ideas we had thought of is kind of like that social media thing. We had talked earlier about the tax on social media and trying to fund mental health. And I think also like a part of it should be encouraging people who want to get a career through social media. Because we've seen that that's become like a whole new industry that's developed. So there are a lot of kids, and a lot of kids want to be content creators and want to be influencers and everything. So you see stuff like that, and you see these kids who will be kind of like out. I feel like where I think about it is, I think the conversation of accountability is always only had through the lens of police. That's why I very much appreciate any way to like talk about what else we can do, because you could make takeover stop if you throw 1 million cops at an area. But then you also are going to catch up some kid who probably isn't really committing a crime, but is just standing there and is bored. So finding that balance, I do want you to ask a little bit more about policing in and of itself and what you hope the future is for other mayors or of other major cities when it comes to finding that balance of not wanting to over-police people who've historically been over-policed, but also making sure that the police can solve like the most violent crimes.
That's right.
How do you, real quick, how do you feel about just overall Chicago policing, like in general?
I mean, look, we are in a much better position than we were a generation ago, right? So when I'm thinking about the DNC, for instance, the Democratic National Convention, how that administration handled protests versus how we handle protests, right? I'm one of the first of all, we were the first major city. In fact, we might be the only major city that called for an immediate ceasefire and the releasing of hostages, right? And, I was one of the first elected leaders to call what was happening over there what it really is. And I took a lot of political heat for it. In fact, You know, there's a $10 million pack that is staring me down every day because I have the temerity to call it for what it is, right? And so, you know, I think that we have a long way to go, right? Because, you know, I'm still paying out settlements that happened when I was in high school or sometimes even before, you know, right? Wow. So, you know, we're seeing a shift. There's a lot more work to be done, but I think even going back, you know, to your point, JJ, about just how we cannot allow ourselves to get sucked into this police state and the militarization of our cities as the only thing that you offer poor people and working people, right? You know what I'm saying? And so that's why I've been real strategic and intentional about laying out where we have to focus our attention. And if we don't do that, you're going to continue to get the same results, right? And so there's been I wouldn't call it a seismic shift, right? But there is a generational shift, right? Because you have a law enforcement that is becoming more diverse. The younger force is being trained better around de-escalation. But I think more importantly, asking police officers to do more than what they are trained to do is problematic across the board. And you're beginning to see people open up to that idea. Brandon Scott in Baltimore, Randall Wolfen in Birmingham, you know what, Barbara Lee, you know, one of our elders, right, who understands the assignment as well.
Thank you for watching this long. If you haven't already, subscribe. What are you doing?
What are you doing?
What are you doing? You think we just sitting here doing it for nothing?
You think you're gonna sit here and not
Need
shit?
to
Like
eat. I know you're not subscribed. Click it.
Cool.